Good morning and welcome to Farming Today this week. It's been a summer of drought, extreme heat and for so much of the country, lots and lots of sunshine. And all week on Farming Today, we've been talking about solar energy, from large-scale solar developments to rooftop panels on farm buildings. Now, this is a topic that raises blood pressures. Some rural communities feel that too much good growing land is being turned into an industrial landscape as solar panels march across fields. Others say it's a small price to pay for clean, renewable energy. And for farmers, after another tough year, a diversification like solar power could make all the difference to the bottom line. Well, to help us explore some of the issues around solar panels in more depth, we have three guests. Dr. Jonathan Scurlock, who's a renewable energy consultant and a former advisor to the National Farmers Union. He's joining us from the studio in Birmingham. Jackie Copley, who's Head of Policy at the CPRE, or the Campaign to Protect Rural England, and also a Chartered Town and Country Planner. She joins us from the studio in Salford. William Leschallas joins us from Cirencester, where he's a lecturer in rural land management at the Royal Agricultural University. Well, good morning to all of you. Let's start with some basics. Jonathan, how much solar do we actually have in the UK and how much farmland is being used?
At the moment, government statistics say about 22,000 megawatts of solar. But for people who can't get their heads around that, in terms of land area, we're looking at something of the order of 20,000 hectares, about 50,000 acres of land, where solar farms make up about 60% of that total. The remainder then being roughly equally distributed between domestic household rooftops and then larger industrial and commercial rooftops.
And looking into the future, what's the government target? How much land might we be looking at in the longer term?
Well, the government has a couple of different targets. Looking out to about 2030, under their Clean Power 2030 plan, the expectation is that we would be getting to somewhere between 40 and 50 gigawatts of solar, a little bit more than double the current estimate, bearing in mind that there's actually quite a lot of solar development now currently under construction and going through the pipeline. This is still a very fast-growing industry, mainly driven by an increasing demand for electrification and falling cost of the generation from solar across all different kinds of platforms.
Jackie Copley from CPRE, why are people so upset about solar on farmland when actually there isn't that much of it? It's less than 0.5% so far.
Well, it does cause a lot of rural strife. It does predominantly focus on our most productive soils. And because of frequent flooding, we are going to have to make wiser choices in terms of where we grow our food, where we recover our nature, and in terms of climate adaptations. And it does impact tenanted farms who are being evicted or having a reduced amount of land to grow food on. So it is impacting people's livelihoods, and people are very upset about industrialisations of very beautiful countryside. So it causes frustration. People feel they're not being heard. And of course, we need to resolve our climate impacts by making sure we fulfil our clean power goals. But we just think it could be done in a way which builds consensus rather than division. And these very, very large solar farms or developments, some of them are over 2,000 hectares. They're very, very large. And we're calling on the government to reduce the amount of solar that is aimed at the ground. And we'd like more rooftop and wasted space, such as car parks, to be utilised. Why not use those obvious spaces first?
We will talk more about that later in the programme. William, at the moment, what decides, if you like, where solar panels go? If a farmer says to a land agent, I'm thinking about this, what do they need to think through and what really will drive that decision?
I think it's probably the other way round, is that it's the suppliers who are looking for sites around the country to put solar farms on. So quite often the landowner is the one who's approached.
And it seems that actually it's how easy the connection is that will be probably the most important factor.
That's the sort of supplier-led. The landowner is really looking at it as a business decision. Is it going to make a difference to their business? And the reality is, at the moment, the returns that you get from agriculture versus the returns you can get from solar agreements. Forgive me, they are complex. So it all sounds very straightforward on this discussion, but they are complex. The returns you'll probably get are going to be significantly higher.
And also they're guaranteed, aren't they? So we've had a terrible harvest. Farmers have spent time and money on a crop which is now losing them money. Whereas if you sign up for 30 years, you know what's happening for the next 30 years.
Yes, indeed. But 30 years is a long old time to sign up for.
Well, as Jackie pointed out, one of the big arguments here is where you put solar panels, and many feel we should be putting more on rooftops, not in fields. And that's what dairy farmer Mick Dakin is doing at Masson Farm in Derbyshire. He's put solar panels on the roof of his farm buildings.
We've reduced the bills through summer currently from £1,200 per month down to £200 per month. We had to install some extra timber purlins to strengthen the roof. But on the ice cream production, because it's a new building, we had no structural requirements. But certainly on our farm, it was a no-brainer because the roof would take them. My personal opinion is that's where the best place to put them on a farm is. I'm nothing against them in fields if that's what the person who owns a field would prefer, but it didn't suit us.
Jonathan, as I say, this has been raised by our listeners. Why aren't there more panels on rooftops? Some feel it should be mandatory, for instance, on all new industrial buildings. Would that work?
The government is already minded to try and encourage, as far as possible, preferential development on commercial rooftops and small to medium-sized enterprises like many farms. My own estimate is that there are at least 20,000 farm rooftop installations across the countryside, so this is by far the most popular option for very many farmers. But the constraints on whether you can actually retrofit a building, particularly once it's already in place, are determined by things like cable size. So it's very difficult to go back afterwards and say, we could actually generate a lot more electricity than the buildings themselves need and export it, because you're going to be limited by the size of those cables. So one of the recommendations of the recent government solar roadmap actually was to engage a different formula when developing new large, out-of-town logistics warehouses and so on, in order to ensure that some of that potential that Jackie was talking about could then actually be implemented. But for the meantime, it is actually just a little simpler and easier to develop solar farms ground-mounted, whether it is a farmer-led development of relatively small scale or whether it is some of these extremely large, nationally significant infrastructure projects.
And Jackie, is that the issue here, actually? That when you're talking about size, when you want to do something relatively quickly, then it's easier to put it on the ground?
Yeah, well, that's the government's aim. It's speed and cost. But CPRE would point out, in actual fact, we do recognise some solar will go on the ground, but we're concerned that we're having a grid upgrade at the moment, our transmission network, and what we're doing is we're upgrading it to remote parts of the country, Eastlands, and that happens to be where our fenlands and our best farmland is. And we would point out, well, why aren't we upgrading the grid to better serve urban conurbations in the north and the Midlands to enable more homes and more commercial properties to be able to take advantage? And we have been doing work with the UK Warehousing Association. Their members are crying out for more retrofit, having no or low interest loans. There's a lot of interventions the government could make to actually make it easier for people to harness rooftop solar. And then, of course, if you've got solar, you can link it to heat pumps, you can link it to electric vehicle charging. The benefits are multiplied. So there's much more we could do. If you look at other countries, we did a piece of research in China, Japan, Poland, Italy, Germany. They're all racing ahead, harnessing wasted space. There are many examples. I love the example of Babysham in Shepton Mallet. They're in a conservation area. They didn't have a single objection to putting solar panels on, and they've saved about $3 million off their energy bills. So if the government wants to unlock clean energy and help businesses to grow, there's a lot more that can be done.
We talk about this a lot on this programme because there's a lot of pressure on land. We want to use it for lots and lots of different things like energy, wildlife, food production. The list goes on and on. So Is perhaps the key to this doing more than one thing, perhaps 2 or 3 things on the same bit of land? Three Valleys Farm near Bedford, they've got 20 acres of solar panels and around 10,000 free-range hens which roam around the panels. They produce both poultry and eggs. Well, here are Charlie and Laura Tompkins on how solar and poultry work alongside each other.
It was wired accordingly, and then there was certain chicken wire put around cables where they go into the inverters. The lease specifically says we're not allowed to graze certain animals in there that can cause trouble to cables and panels.
We've not had any negative issues doing poultry under panels, and in fact the egg inspector, they like the fact that it provides shade in the summer, and underneath the panels themselves you've got a different soil structure because not a lot grows there, so they can start having dust baths, which is all good for the chickens.
Jonathan, how common is this dual use of land?
Well, at the moment, good practice, which is strongly supported by the solar energy industry itself, encourages this kind of multi-purpose land use with grazing of small livestock, things like poultry or sheep, underneath the existing common structure of solar farms where everything is fixed tilt facing southwards. There are very interesting possibilities starting to emerge now, but not yet really adopted across the UK, so-called agrivoltaics, where the mounting system is more explicitly designed to offer greater flexibility in agricultural land use. So one possibility is slightly taller, more massive mounts, which can rotate from east to west, and it would then be possible to put dairy or beef cattle onto relatively good quality pasture grazing underneath such solar arrays. Yet another configuration is to have bifacial solar fences running north-south across a field, spaced maybe about 8 to 10 metres apart, and allowing plenty of room for agricultural machinery to do things like cutting silage, again on good quality pasture land. You're getting essentially 2 functions from the same land.
How soon might that be a reality rather than a lovely idea?
Well, agrivoltaics is already being deployed in nearby countries like Germany, France and Italy. I think it's just a matter of time before it comes to the UK. That gift is really in the hands of the solar developers themselves. Let's just see who starts to implement this commercially first. I think there's an enormous public relations breakthrough to be had here, because if the general public can see land being used for more than just small livestock, then perhaps some of these objections about a perception of a threat to food security would go away. We know, of course, that there is at national level very little threat to food security because the total land take for solar is still so vanishingly small. But that's not necessarily how people perceive it at local level.
Jackie, from a CPRE point of view, would that go any way to solving some of your objections to the march of solar?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were very pleased that DEFRA this year published its land use framework, and that looks about stacking benefits from our land. You know, we anticipate 40% of solar would need to go on the ground because of the pace in which we need to achieve our climate targets. But there's many different examples of how doing it well, you can have community-led solar. We know of a South Hill Solar in Oxfordshire where the community have set up a relatively modest scale solar farm, and they have a community orchard, and they raise the funding through bonds, and it's been a really good success story. It blends into the landscape. They've allowed hedgerows to grow. And then other examples, Swaffham Prior in East Cambridge, the local parish council, again a small ground mounted scheme, but the whole village has come off oil and gone on to heat pumps, and they're all taking advantage of clean energy, cheaper bills. 40 parish councils in the surrounding areas are saying, that's amazing, we want to have a part of that. But these decisions must be made with communities. If you do it against the will of the public, it's self-defeating. You're driving people away from supporting clean power. You must speak to the local communities to understand landscapes that are special, farmland that's best and most versatile, and where you can avoid harms, and yes, deliver more community benefits. That's the other thing. These very large ones, they barely pay any community sums. And you look at the community-led ones, and the community payback is in spades. And that is not talking about these massive mega, it's talking about more socially responsible ways of harnessing clean energy.
Is the size one of the key ways of getting the community on board? Because in places like Lincolnshire or Cambridgeshire, the big solar developments that people object to, they really feel that those counties are taking more than their fair share. I heard that a lot in Lincolnshire, that why are all these farms here?
Yeah, that's right.
Why are they?
You mentioned before about grid capacity, and clearly Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire had coal-fired power stations, and so there is grid capacity, and that's one of the main thing. When we talk about scale, we're talking about, it's not just people living in villages who are objecting, it's the landscape experts of the local council saying, hang on a minute, this is a predominantly rural area, and you're going to completely industrialise it with solar panels, because you don't just have the panels, you have large security fencing, you have lighting, so it definitely is more intrusive in the landscape when you have lots of very large sites clustered together. And so you can understand, and when you look at the map of people who are voting for parties that are anti-net zero, there's a linkage between people feeling frustrated and feeling unwelcoming of this. Particularly if you go into a village and you've got solar panels on all sides of the village, it's totally changing the nature of the place people live in.
You're listening to Farming Today this week here on BBC Radio 4. Today, discussing solar power. Our guests are Jonathan Scurlock, who's a renewable energy consultant, Jackie Copley, Head of Policy at the CPRE, the Campaign to Protect Rural England, and William Leschallas, a lecturer in rural land management at the Royal Agricultural University. William, when you're talking to your students who are going to become land agents advising farmers on all this, what do you advise them on the community aspect of this, the people bit, if you like?
That's a very interesting question, because a lot of what land agents do is about talking to people, about engaging with people. And it's those human skills, those soft skills are so important to bring, as Jackie was saying, the local community with you. It's a really complex area, and something that we as educators are really trying to get to grips with our students, to bring them forward as professional people who will give impartial advice in a complex environment.
Well, let's look at an example of a solar development which has met strong local opposition. That's in Staffordshire, where many residents are up in arms about the effect of 3 solar farms planned for an area around Droyton. Opponents say they'll cover around 80% of the land in the area. Well, our reporter Bob Huckenhall spoke to David Gregory. He's fallen out with the farmer next door who said yes to solar panels on his land.
I'm not happy at all. I mean, we're just virtually 100% surrounded by them, and no matter what direction we're looking, we're going to see panes of glass facing us. And it's just horrendous. This is a chap I went to school with, known all my life, and now we no longer speak and totally blank each other.
And how do you feel about that?
It's a shame.
Did they approach you at all?
Yes, but I'm in a small farm and my acreage wasn't big enough.
And would you have gone ahead with it?
No, definitely not. Very much opposed to them in that respect.
That's a community in Staffordshire split over solar development. The dairy farmer whose land's being leased for the solar farm told us he wasn't out to ruin the area. The solar farm was a way he could stay living in the area, have a holiday, have a life. Jonathan, how big a factor is local opinion when landowners are making these decisions? Or is it actually more down to a national land use plan?
One has to be rather careful in commenting upon individual planning cases. In some cases, you will get neighbour against neighbour. We have to recognise that the agricultural industry is a very broad church. Farmers don't necessarily speak with one voice. And we have been here before. For example, with onshore wind development, we have seen farmers falling out with their near neighbours because one farmer may be receiving a nice ground rent for hosting the turbine. The neighbour simply has to say, well, you've ruined my view because that thing's so obvious and I'm not receiving any income from it. So we would see the same kind of thing with solar, except perhaps that solar is much less obvious in the landscape. So while some people may feel threatened that they're going to be surrounded by unfamiliar looking structures in fields, in many cases at eye level, you really don't actually see very much because they are screened by high hedges if they're responsibly installed on relatively level ground.
Although some of our listeners say it's a horrible thing to look at, and also it won't work in the winter. It won't be an all-round resource. So what's the point?
Well, the cost per kilowatt hour of electricity from solar is now among the lowest anywhere in the world. That is why the industry is growing so quickly. Clearly, it doesn't generate at night, and about 75% of your solar output in Britain is received between about March and October, and only a quarter between October and March. So you often would need to compensate for that. But in many cases, individual farmers or at national level, significant amounts of what would otherwise be fossil fuel dirty carbon intensive generation is being displaced by clean power.
Jackie, the CPRE regularly voices its concerns about these sorts of developments. How much of this can be dismissed as a NIMBY argument? You know, renewables are great, I just don't want to have to look at them over the hedge.
We have to take a reasonable view, and I said before that we are accepting some will go on the ground, but we just like it to follow better principles, and therefore you would avoid such objection. I think if you have been raised and live your life or gone and retired to a particular area and you have done so because you want to be surrounded by tranquil countryside, and then you find out actually all of your landscapes are going to be covered in solar panels, and whilst there are some methods of designing sites so they fit into the landscape, but actually a lot of panels are becoming taller and they actually can change angles. So when they're these massive ones, they have a very prominent impact on the landscape. And I don't think it's fair just to sideline somebody's view saying that they're a NIMBY. It's used a lot, but, people's quality of life are being impacted, and part of England's iconic countryside is the way it looks, pastoral landscapes, and there are some landscapes that are more degraded or urban than others. So we need to be sensible about the way we do it. And I think those farmers that want to proceed should be looking at rooftops and dairy sheds first, and then look at poorer quality land that's not yielding the same amounts of food. So, and that's more sensible. I think people can understand that.
Just before we end, I wonder if I can put a question to all three of you. Will this summer, because it's been so sunny and also so difficult for farmers, both livestock farmers and those growing arable crops, will this be a turning point when we look at solar panels in the countryside? William, what do you think?
I think it's just going to increase the farmers' determination to look at alternative sources of income. Solar is just a form of diversification for many landowners to find alternative income to supplement, replace agricultural incomes that used to be very strong and provide a very good livelihood. And farmers see themselves first and foremost in the main as food producers.
Jackie, what do you think?
Well, I think the summer we've just had really puts the matter into sharp focus, and I think climate deniers out there, they just need to get a grip, really. We have got challenges in rural areas from flooding, droughts, extreme heats, and we all need to get on board and support the government. But CPRE just wants to have the majority, the lion's share of solar should be aimed at waste of space. It shouldn't go on farmland.
Jonathan?
I think that summer 2026 will be seen as a bit of a turning point. And frankly, there are even more severe impacts to come. We're just hearing from the Met Office about a particularly strong El Nino impact in terms of global climate. So we can expect perhaps, some stress from rainfall and flooding over the winter, and then maybe another severely dry summer to come after that, so-called climate whiplash, where things are flipping from one state to another. And in response to this, public and decision makers will probably see that, yes, we are now facing a climate emergency. Urgent action needs to be taken. The UK still has an opportunity to demonstrate leadership in rapidly decarbonising both our electricity supply and then all the other parts of the economy.
Well, thank you. That sadly is all we have time for. Thank you very much to our guests, Jackie Copley from the CPRE, the renewable energy consultant Jonathan Scurlock, and William Leschallas from the Royal Agricultural University. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Rebecca Rooney, and Farming Today this week is a BBC Audio Bristol production.